Good morning, everybody. We might have a few folks joining us late. Come on in, guys. Appreciate everybody making it, though. A little bit of rain, good time to start planting. So today we are going to talk about herbs and veggies. There we go. We're going to cover our Herbs and Veggies 101. My name is Rodney. If we have not gotten to meet yet, I am the owner of Garden 17. If you guys have any questions during the class today, please do not hesitate to just ask. The idea of this is that you guys leave with more knowledge than you came in with, right? So ask away. There are a couple of things I wanted to give a shout out about that they've left me a list for real quick. The tool sharpening is happening today, so if you guys do need pruners, lawnmower blades, stuff like that, we do have, I believe it's Central, I forget their name actually, but they are at the back gate. They're at the back gate. They're an awesome group. We do 2 or 3 events with them a year, so we have them here until 2 today. And then tomorrow we have Vanessa with From the Garden. She's going to be doing a live demo, cooking demo with like herbs and veggies and such, and how to use the plants in the kitchen kind of concept. So if you guys want, pop back tomorrow. It is going to be a free event in this same space, and she will start right around 11 tomorrow. So feel free to pop on back from that to just learn a little more about kind of how to use everything in the kitchen and cultivating and such. But today, like I said, if you guys have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to just ask them as we go. And then make sure to see me at the end of the class. I have got everybody's voucher with me in my pocket. So today we will cover things with different bed types, talk about the basics of each type, the benefits and downfalls of each, if you will. We'll talk about soil. Most important piece, honestly, of urban veggie gardening, right, is all your soil work. We'll talk about watering, feeding, care, growing, and then we'll talk about some common pests and how to deal with those most appropriately. So let's jump right in. Awesome. All right, so garden bed types, always kind of the first decision when planning out your garden, right? Are we going to do it in ground? Are we going to do it as a raised bed? Are we going to use a pot or some sort of container, right? There are definitely benefits and downfalls to each type. Does anybody here have garden beds at home already? Yeah, awesome, love it, awesome, cool. My personal favorite is a raised bed, and I'll talk about that and kind of why that is. But a lot of folks like doing the in-ground. To me, it's a little bit more work here in our Austin area, right? Our soils are so super tough and a lot harder to control when we're working in the ground. I don't know about you guys, but I also have a full-time job, so doing it in-ground is quite a bit of work, right? So that is kind of the one downfall of doing them in-ground, but the huge benefit of in-ground is space, right? You are really not limited, and that's the wonderful thing about doing them in-ground. If anybody is thinking about doing an in-ground or you have an in-ground garden bed already, one of the biggest things that I would stress is soil, right? We're going to talk about a lot about soil today, but in-ground most important is going to be soil. So making sure that we're refreshing that soil every year, whether that be with a compost or some sort of nutrients and such. But that's really going to be the main goal. One nice product that I really enjoy is the Fox Farm. It's this bright yellow bag here on the floor, and I've got some over up against the window too. They call it their soil conditioner. It's a really great one if you've started your bed last year and you're refreshing this year. It's kind of a quick jump start. So it's a good one to kind of just revitalize and kick things off, but that's a really nice one to mix in for that as well, kind of like a compost substitute a little bit, but I would still encourage adding in compost into the garden as well. Raised beds, great thing about raised bed is control. You've got total control of the soil, right? We're building it up out of the ground. You can make it out of many different materials. A lot of folks use the wood like we've seen here in the photo, right? But you can really use a lot of different things. I've seen some beautiful ones made out of stone and cobble, right? Things of that nature that really make them beautiful. But the biggest thing with a raised bed is going to be control. You're basically making the soil start to finish, right? Filling that whole bed up. There's a lot of benefits in the raised bed in the way in which you can layer that raised bed too, right? I don't know if we've seen some of those beds where they've put in, you kind of collect your leaves around the yard, right? Kind of layer that in with your soil to kind of jumpstart that composting and micronutrient process, right? So again, just huge control there with what the soil is doing, right? And then containers. Containers are great for small spaces. If anybody's got an apartment or a condo that they live in, right, and you can only grow things on a balcony or in a small courtyard type setting, containers are great for that. Containers are going to be very similar to the raised bed concept in the way of getting control over the soil, right? You know exactly what is happening in your soil in that way. And you can do all sorts of things. I found this fun photo where someone obviously spray painted a bunch of like 5-gallon buckets, right? So there's a lot of different containers that you can use as well, but the biggest thing there is just going to make sure that you've got enough root development space, right? Any plant that is going to grow a fruit, so even into fruit trees and such, root space is going to be super important, right? We need that root development in order to support the fruit that it is producing, right? Any big questions on bed types? We're gonna be referencing back to all of this stuff as we go, but that's kind of the quick run through. We'll figure out the slideshow here in a second. There we go. Soil. One of the biggest things that we talk a lot about with soil. So soil is going to be really important. Think about soil being like a foundation of your home, right? If you've got a good foundation, your walls are less likely to crack. But if you've got a really poor foundation, your walls are going to crack often. So think about soil as a way of building a foundation for your plant material. So healthy soil is going to be really, really important. You can get healthy soil in a handful of ways, but you want to maintain its health. Soil can become depleted, right? So as we water, thinking about doing things in containers or pots or raised beds, the more we water, the more those nutrients are going to wash through that soil, right? So we will lose value in the soil, right? One of the great products that I like to use when we're talking about soil health is Microlife's Humates. Has anybody used Microlife product before? No? This is awesome. I love this. This is great. We're going to talk a lot about this then. Microlife's a really cool company. What I like about Microlife is every granular product, right, something that is a little pebble-like fertilizer or anything of that nature, has binding agents to keep everything together. One great thing that Microlife does is uses things that are beneficial to keep everything held together, right? Alfalfa and stuff like that helps feed the soil. What Humates is, though, is basically a concentrated compost. So we'll notice that the ratios on the front say 004, right? So it's really just all about the soil in this guy. I think they even label it a concentrated compost, right? But that's basically what this is. So this guy is going to be really, really great, especially for your raised beds and your containers, to help rejuvenate that soil, to give it nutrients without adding volume, right? Because that is always a headache in the way of, hey, I've got a container, I've got my raised beds, and I'm trying to add in compost, but I'm already full, right? So we have to break some of that down. So this is a great in-between way to feed the soil itself. Is everybody familiar with the ratios? With the 004? Love this. This is great. You guys are going to be so educated. All right, so the way to look at this is I always tell everybody, don't go back to 7th grade to relearn all your chemistry and such. Leaves, blooms, roots, right? Leaves, blooms, roots. That is the way to look at those 3 numbers. So first one is going to be feeding your leaves, second one feeding your blooms, third one feeding your roots. Roots can also mean soil, though. So like we see in this compost, the 4, it's letting us know, hey, I'm feeding the soil or the root level of the plant, right? So 004. Another one that we'll talk about today as a food is their general purpose one here, which is an 846, right? So leaves, blooms, roots, thinking about what we're feeding in that ratio, right? Now, some products will have certain things like, like acidifiers and stuff like that added to them, right? For your more acid-loving things, let's think about our citrus trees, right? As an example, they like a little more acidity. They do create a red label one that is an acidified one that I believe is also an 846, if I'm remembering correctly. It might be a 624, but I believe it's an 846. Red label, though, adding in some acidity to the soil. So we're going to see a big benefit there in adding in that acidity, right? But basically, ratio is going to be the same, that 846, right? So those guys are going to be ways to add in nutrients to the soil to get that prep. One thing that we'll talk about with healthy soil is it needs a bunch of organic matter, right? Healthy soil means the soil's alive, right? Dirt is basically dead, right? So there's a really big difference between soils and dirts in that way. Dirt is a bad word. Don't use that. We want to go with soils. Soils typically are referencing something that's healthy, something that's alive, right? We've got a lot of microorganisms living in there, doing what we need it to do, which is kind of break down that soil and help aerate that soil. In the meantime, we do help our garden beds with aerating our soils though, right? Hose, hand picks, things of that nature help aerate the soil. As we water, we are reducing the oxygen that is in the soil as well. So we've talked a little bit about how that nutrient is going to run through. We're also reducing the oxygen that's in the soil. So we want to basically fluff the soil to get some oxygen in there. A good healthy soil has about 25% oxygen in the soil. So if you kind of imagine that ratio when you're going and you're walking out to your raised bed, or even a perennial bed, right, where you kind of walk across the ground to help weed and things of that nature, every time we're stepping, we're compressing that soil. So helping aerate that does wonders. I do it probably 5 to 6 times a year, honestly. I've got a little hand trowel I keep at home. I should have brought one in here. We have them in our tool shed over there though, but it's just, as I'm weeding, I kind of fluff the soil as I go, right? It's also a great way to help break out your mulch. Does anybody use top dressers on their raised beds, or do we typically avoid that? Yeah, just a standard mulch kind of thing? Yeah. So mulch is really nice because it's, again, adding organic matter to the bed, right? It's also helping protect our soil in the way of preventing the sun from hitting it directly and drying it out, right? But mulch is a great organic matter to add back to the soil as well, right? So as we're aerating and as we're kind of fluffing our soils in that way, we can be mixing this mulch back into the soil, and mulch typically is relatively chunky, right? And so we're adding texture to the soil in order to hold in some oxygen, right? So we're getting that air back into the soil in that nature, or in that method as well, right? Talking a little bit about mulch, mulch is great for retaining moisture. Right? That's how we can hold a lot of moisture, especially as we start to heat up. I'm not sure what this weather is and what it has been lately, but you know, we're ready. We're all wearing sweatshirts, right? But the plants are not, right? So the plants are used to something a little bit more of a rhythm, right? And so our plants freak out a little bit. Redbuds are a great example of that. I saw them do it again this year, right? I don't know if anybody noticed that, but we had our spring in January, right? If anyone remembers those 2 weeks we had, right? Yeah. The redbuds were like, great, it's already been cold, it's time to warm up again. And then we got another little bit of ice coming through. And so they weren't really sure what to do, but they tried to bloom again as they were leafing out past that, right? Plants aren't used to the up and the down, right? We can quickly adjust by popping back inside to grab a jacket. Plants don't really know what to do with that. So we want to regulate their soil as best we can. And that keeping that soil healthy is a way to do that. And mulch really helps with that. It helps insulate the soil and keeps the ground a little bit more regulated in temperature. The roots are the most important thing to protect for your plant, right? So the mulch is really helping add all of these benefits into any bed, really, right? But particularly for our herbs and veggies. Any big soil questions there that I didn't hit on? Yes, please.
So when you are adding additives or the products that we see here,
yeah.
How worried about you are the fluctuations in pH levels, as well as you might put too much?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can always put more. But
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So if we're using a good, well-balanced organic soil, right, like a compost, our raised bed mix is another really great example of that. It's kind of a ready-to-go mix for a raised bed or a large container situation where it's got a bit of compost in it as well. When we're using something like that, they typically start fairly neutral, okay? So when we're starting in our base, we're starting fairly neutral. Really where you're changing your pH is depending on how much of each organic matter you're putting into that bed. So if you're composting at home, it's going to be a little bit more important to pay attention to that, more leaf matter versus brown matter, right, etc. When it comes to a lot of your standard, let's say, nutrients and supplements that you're going to be using, so something like the humates and such, they're actually fairly neutral. It's when you start to use things like your acidified fertilizers and such that you can change a little bit of that. I'm typically not too worried about it unless you're using something specifically to change the pH in your soil, though. So if you're using something like a Microlife or a Medina product even that are organic fertilizers and supplements, right, they're usually not changing the level of pH too much. If you are using something that's an inorganic that contains synthetics, they are typically using binding agents that can change that pH. And so I usually just steer clear from those, and as long as you're steering clear from those, you're typically fine. There are products that can help change the pH if you need to, but for the most part, if you're using herbs and veggies that grow in our area, they want our slightly more alkaline soils. Even starting neutral, you're always going to err a little bit on the alkaline side because, again, just our organic matter around us in our yards is going to be more on the alkaline side. Yeah, absolutely.
How do you aerate when you've got something in a container?
That's a great question. A trowel actually is the best way to do that. So just a hand trowel, right? Typically long, thin blade. I typically go around the edge of the container and I just kind of push inward ever so slightly. Not so hard that we're hearing our roots snap, right? But that's a good way to get oxygen around to the edges. If you're using something kind of like that example photo, like the 5-gallon bucket size, usually of 12 to 14 inch is kind of your safe range in that. That's a really great way to do it. Another great container that I didn't even hit on are going to be these smart pots. Has anybody ever used a smart pot before? You guys are going to be so educated. I love this. A smart pot, though, is like a felt-like material. And so a smart pot, instead of having a rigid, non-porous edge, is basically all porous, right? It actually is, it's such a soft material that you will eventually have roots grow out the side. So a little bit less focus of aeration needed on something like this because the entire surface of this container is breathable. They make several different sizes of these. I brought the 7-gallon, which is kind of the most common that we use for like a tomato pepper kind of situation, right? But yeah, these guys are really, really great. And they've got a bunch of great little infographics of a healthier root system and what that can look like. Their main boxes that we have in the apothecary, the small building over here by the register, have a little QR on them too. But they've got a lot of great info on that and just root health with proper oxygen in the soil, basically. Yeah. But this would be a good way to have to just not aerate, basically, right? So it kind of takes that step out of the process. I believe all of their containers too have, yeah, they've all got their cubic footage on them so that you know how much soil is needed for one container kind of thing. Great thing about a smart pot too, being fabric instead of a ceramic or a clay of some sort, is they're literally a third of the price. So you get a lot more bang for the buck that way too. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
When you're putting seeds in the ground,
Yeah.
should you put mulch on top of it as well?
So it depends on your seed and how fast your germination rate is. If you are going to mulch something like that to keep the moisture in, very, very thin layer. You don't want anything too heavy. So typically I go about a 1/2 inch, no more than 1/2 inch though. Yeah, but that will help you retain moisture in your soil for germination, for sure. Awesome, cool. So let's jump to the next one here because we're going to talk about watering. So in our watering, does anybody have an irrigation system that they use with their beds or anything currently, or do we do a lot of hand watering, drip hose? Okay, cool. I actually prefer that for herbs and veggies, honestly. I prefer getting out there by hand because it's going to force you to go and look at the plant, right? Hand watering is my most zen moment in my yard. I also have far too many plants. But my favorite tool for hand watering is this guy right here. It's Dram's watering wand. It makes reaching really, really easy, right? So saves the back a little bit of energy. Hooks up to the hose, and then you basically just choose what spray head that you want. The one I've got here is what they call the 400. Basically just talks about flow and how many holes you're using, etc. But this guy can go right at the end there and makes like a nice shower head. They also have one for seed starting, so if you're doing a lot of stuff by seed, it's a nice seed and it basically regulates the pressure so it comes out like a light mist, right? They've got a lot of different fittings and adaptings, and I've got a few over here on the table as well if you want to check them out on the way out kind of thing. But this is one of my most favorite tools. Super easy, super simple, but it really does help with hand watering. Allows you to kind of reach in between plants without spraying too hard or disturbing the soils on especially our new transplants, right? So you get a little bit more control in that way as far as your reach. So really, really great tool to have around. Watering with like a drip hose, the kind of the drip tubing that you can snake through, just make sure it's under your mulch layer. Right? You want to make sure that the water can access the soil as fast as possible, right? That's what's going to keep it the most efficient. Keeping it under the mulch too will also help keep the lifespan of your drip or soaker hose, right? The sun can beat those guys up pretty quick. It's a very thin, light material they use on most of those. So keeping it under the mulch layer also keeps it like a sunscreen, if you will, right? But that way it also keeps the moisture under that mulch layer to keep it basically keep it wet like you need it to be, right? If you do use a hose end sprinkler, I think I put them over here, a hose end sprinkler, by default I kind of do what they used to dub as the what they say, dad's favorite or whatever, but it's just the standard metal, nothing fancy, right? What's nice about these guys is this is the square pattern. They'll make them in circular patterns and such as well, but again, in a raised bed situation, square's typically the easier shape to build, right? So these guys are really nice for stuff like that. Really, really simple, easy to use. All parts are metal, last you forever. I think this one is $10, right? Like, I mean, this is just, I think I've had one for over 20 years now, but they just last forever. They're really great flow rates, easy to control, easy to clean kind of thing, right? So super important with your watering tools in that way. Drip tube, going back to the drip hose, those guys are really great because you can also extend end to end, right? So if you do expand your beds and things of that nature, it gets you a little more space to work kind of concept. Drip tube for automated irrigation, right? Scheduling is going to be really important on those, but spacing of the emitters on a drip tube is very different. Does anybody have automated irrigation at home right now? No, then I'm going to spare us that whole section. Then there's no point in talking about that. So, again, I would encourage, if you're not using automated, to do it by hand. Again, the biggest thing with watering is that is your time to get out into the garden and to really look at your plants, right? That's the part where you notice there's bugs, there's fruit, you know, what is the soil looking like, how is it feeling, that kind of thing. So it really does force you to kind of get out there and play in the garden kind of thing. We've kind of hit on some of this, but we'll keep rolling with that. So let's talk a little bit more about the idea of our supplements and nutrients in the garden. So again, if we're starting with a good base, you know, again, good neutral soil. I really like the raised bed if you're doing something in a large container or a literal raised bed. Raised bed mix is great. Again, starting fairly neutral. Every time I do my plantings, I make sure to have my humates with me and my liquid seaweed. So these are the two things. If you're going to spend any money when you're buying a transplant, this is what I would buy, aside from soil. Spend all your money on soil, by the way. Buy inexpensive other things. Buy the smaller plant, right? The general rule of thumb when you're planting a plant is $1 plant in a $10 hole versus a $10 plant in a $1 hole, right? So soil super important. But the other two accessories I would have are these two guys. So the humates to give us that concentrated compost, right? We can use this as a granular to mix this in to our hole as we prep. Remember, when we're planting, we want to be twice as wide and just as deep as the grow pot, basically, okay? That you want to loosen all of that soil around. So general rule of thumb is twice as wide and just as deep. Use this piece lily here, but as a general example, this is a 6-inch, so I want to make sure to have at least a 12-inch hole all the way around, and they say just as deep in the way of the height of the pot. If you're in a raised bed, you've already got loose soil underneath here. If you're doing an in-ground bed, definitely break out a couple of inches underneath and then backfill before planting, right? But general goal is always the soil level that's in the pot here should be the soil level at which you're planting at, okay? But when we do that, we're going to use, I think it's a 1/4 cup, somewhere around there, about a 1/4 cup of our humates. And then the liquid seaweed is going to be like your supplement, okay? So these guys are feeding your soil here, and this is going to feed basically the cells of the plant, okay? Think of this like a sunscreen in the summertime for your spring plantings, right? Use this in the early morning. This beefs up the cell structure of the plant, makes the leaves a little bit thicker, more resilient to things like bugs, heat stress, etc. But this is a supplement in the way of just helping them along. Think of it like a vitamin C for your plant kind of concept, right? Multivitamin, if you will. 1 ounce to a gallon of water with your liquid seaweed, though. Super easy to use. You're never really going to overdo it. The only time you can overdo something like this is if you just pour it straight from the bottle onto the plant, right? So always dilute, but other than that, really safe to use. What's great about liquid seaweed, every plant loves liquid seaweed. So if you have houseplants and such as well, this is a great product to have around, okay? Microlife also makes one that they call a super seaweed in a liquid as well. Humates, again, for the feed. That is just feeding our soil. So now our plant is started. We've got our start in the ground ready to go with the right nutrients, but we are going to need to provide a breakfast, lunch, and dinner concept, right? That's what a fertilizer is going to do for us, okay? So the humates was at 004, right? We're feeding the roots and that idea, but we do still need to feed the plant in order to produce a bloom first, then the fruit, right? But the ultimate goal being the fruit there. So you are going to want something like a fertilizer, an example of this 846, to really help that along, right? Now, Again, I said think about this as more of like a breakfast, lunch, dinner. We don't typically eat 2 dinners at the same time. Not typically. There are those days, though, right? But we don't typically eat 2 dinners at the same time. We do typically take our vitamin C with our dinner or our breakfast in that example, right? You can always use a food and a supplement together. That is 100% okay. We don't want to do 2 supplements or 2 foods, though. That is where you are going to cause burn, overfeed, and things of that nature, right? But a supplement and a food together is totally safe and fine. So typically when I'm making sure to do my fertilizer, I will water it in with a supplement. So if I am out in the garden feeding, I'm going to do lazy garden method and do 2 birds with 1 stone, right? I'm going to mix up my liquid seaweed, and that's how I'm going to make sure my fertilizer gets watered in. Now, if anybody took advantage of the rain, I was out there like a crazy person in my garden, and I was putting out fertilizer in the rain drenched. But that is the best way to do it. If we know you're going to get rain, take advantage of that, right? Because now you're going to use less water for your garden, and you know it's going to get thoroughly saturated in, right? So food, fertilizers like a breakfast, lunch, dinner in that way, okay? Now there's other ways and other supplements and micronutrients that we can add in, though. Excuse me. That's going to be like these guys over here. So we've got things like the bone meal, the Epsom salts, the blood meals, and the magnesium sulfates, which is essentially just the same Epsom salts, right? But these guys are also going to add in a micronutrients, typically to correct or add something to the soil specific, okay? So one of the things, let me actually just skip forward so you guys can see this photo. So one of the most common things that we get questions on with the tomatoes is the blossom end rot, right? Has anybody grown tomatoes before with the blossom end rot? Actually, cool. So one of the great things about that is bone meal is going to add some calcium to the soil for you. What's great about this is it's also, you'll notice, 0, 10, 0. So it's also going to help feed the bloom too, which is what we want. But in feeding the bloom, it's also adding in the calcium. If you don't need a micronutrients like calcium, you do want to stand with this typical fertilizer, right? We don't want to overdo things on a plant. That's where we can cause the fertilizer burn and fertilizer stress in our plants, right? But this guy is going to help fix things like the blossom end rot, right? Using calcium will fix that. It's also going to help the plant produce more blooms. So when you've got that fruit, you can cut it off to get rid of it so it's not affecting and stressing the plant. And ideally, you're using something that's helping also add in additional blooms, right? So it kind of does 2 courses in that way. But that's where the micronutrients are going to come in, or supplements, you know, additives, things of that nature, right? Soil amendments, if you will, right? One thing I'm realizing I'm missing too is earthworm castings. Earthworm castings is another really, really great one to use. Comes in a small bag, similar size. We have that in the apothecary as well, but a great way to add some micronutrients again to the soil and kind of beef up that root system as well, right? Let's see, what kind of, are you guys growing, what are we mostly growing? Tomatoes, peppers right now, herbs, mix? Zucchini and squash, okay, cool. Oh goodness, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right as it starts to produce all the grapes.
Cry in a corner for a little while and then go back at it. Yeah. Squash borers are really, really tough. So we've got in there a product called Neem Max, or Max Neem, something like that is what it's called. It's a small liquid bottle. There's methods of being able to inject that into the stem. The struggle or the problem that you run into is they're not always super effective. So typically when I'm doing transplants, I'll use like diatomaceous earth, make a real big mound around the base of the plant to help kind of keep them away. The problem with your squash though is every place that the vine touches the ground is an opportunity, right? And if you ever get a squash borer down the vine, cutting it, getting rid of the rest, and overproducing in the way of getting it extra supplements and soil amendments will continue the growth. But basically anywhere that the vine touches the ground, I typically do a little mound of diatomaceous earth. The downfall with diatomaceous earth is it's really light and powdery, so on a really windy day it could get blown away, or anytime it rains or you water, you'll notice it'll dissolve as well. It's not bad for the soil, it's a great additive to the soil. If you've got a dog, when you see them rolling around on their back in the dirt, they're actually pulling out the diatomaceous earth to help dry out their skin. So it's one of your most organic things you could possibly put into the garden. But anywhere that vine touches the ground, pile of that diatomaceous earth, and then using the neem on a regular, unfortunately.
So do you just, even before they're there, like I just planted
Yep.
seeds, they just start
with your diet.
And
You don't want to eject yet. Use the neem more of like a surface spray, right? But you want to remember neem is going to be a straight oil. So super early morning or super late in the day, out of the heat of the day and out of the sun, because it'll just cause burn on that foliage. Yep. Keep neem on hand, ready to use. Yeah. Now, one of the products I was going to talk about today is this Be Safe line, which is really great. It's in the name. It's Be Safe, 100%. So they're not using things like pyrethrins and such like that in their mixes. The downfall is this also isn't strong enough for something like the squash boar, right? So that's going to be your kind of your tough battle. Now, neem is fairly safe for your squash boars, but if you are injecting, it's becoming a systemic, which means that it's in the plants through and through, right? So every time it blooms and goes to pollen, you always have that small risk, right? But neem is super organic, safe to drink, technically acclaimed by the inventor, but I wouldn't do it. But these guys they don't have quite enough active ingredient to do something like a squash boar. But your standard aphids and mealybugs and stuff like that, these guys are great for. Yep. So as a general rule of thumb or general care, Be Safe is kind of the way I tend to lean. You want the bees, you want the butterflies, you want the bugs in the garden, right? Because they are all good and help with the pollinators. I've got a few handouts up here. Whole pamphlet that the city of Austin puts out with their great little program. You guys are holding their pamphlets in front of you of beneficial insects, right? You really want to know what a beneficial insect looks like. That's why these great photos, is it on that side? Yes. Great photos of what a good bug looks like. Don't be afraid of these bugs, right? These are the ones that are helping pollinate our plants, right? These are the ones that are getting pollen from one to the next to help produce the fruits, etc. These are the ones we want in the yard, right? Again, I've got all these up here, so feel free to bring them home with you today, kind of thing. These are the ones we don't want, right? That's a whole other list of bugs. So on aphids, like I said, aphids, mealybugs, typically the ones that we see the most common, especially this time of year in the early start where it's a little bit humid, but not too hot and dry just yet. That's where these guys come into play. These guys are kind of a 3-in-1 in the way of, I think this is the 3-in-1, yeah. So it'll say right here on the front, it's got the insecticide, fungicide, and miticide in it, right? So it's doing things like the spider mites as well. Does anybody have a lot of trouble with spider mites out in their garden beds and raised beds?
only inside.
Inside, that's, yeah. I mean, I feel like most folks run into that. You can use this inside. Indoors, the only thing I would say with this Be Safe one is that it is a little kind of sesame oil, got a smell to it, so it's got a little bit of a funky smell that lingers a little bit longer than like a neem might. So just being aware of that. Maybe not spraying it right before your dinner party is a good idea, you know? But this you can use indoors as well for your mites. But what's nice about this one is it's got the little bit of fungicide in it. Now, why that's important in a garden bed is because we fluctuate so much in our soil moisture, right? So typical root rots, leaf fungals and things of that nature, lack of nutrients, right? You know, all of these things that happen, these guys are generally good for as a preventative in that method as well. Really great price point for how protective to the wildlife it is too. So great line of products there in that way. The photo in the upper right here is so easy. It's a difficult one in the way of typical rule of thumb: brown leaf underwater, yellow leaf is overwater, right? This is the opposite. When we get into our garden, this is actually a fertilizer burn. So it's really hard to always differentiate between certain details of overwatering and underwatering when we have fertilizing as a whole other layer that we're looking at, right? So again, kind of knowing the difference. But the one big thing I wanted to point out, because this has come up a lot in the fall for us as well, you don't notice the veining of the leaf anymore here, right? And it's not necessarily about the structure of the leaf, it's just starting at the tip, creeping back. That's usually a good sign that we're either missing nutrients or we have too much nutrients, right? So the way I usually tell people, snip off one of those leaves, bring them in, so we can help you guys identify what it is. Is it a lack? Is it too much? Etc. Overwatering, you're typically seeing the veining of the leaf still. Okay, so we still see the clear veining of the leaf, and it's the foliage in between the veins that starts turning that yellowing, right? Best way to battle overwatering, aerate your soil. It means your soil's not breathing, right? So keep that in mind as you're going. The spotting on the leaf, up in here in those photos there, we see a little bit of that brown spot in there as well. Brown, good sign of burn, right? So There's some intuition that we use in the garden bed in that way, but how to battle it is always, what do I do to fix it? What's the remedy, right, is always the question. So just kind of understanding those different parts and how to balance that. But again, aeration is going to be your biggest friend when it comes to your garden beds. Mealybugs and aphids, we kind of hit on that a little bit. We love to hate them. What else do we do in our garden beds besides battle mealybugs and aphids, right? But this is a great little handout in the way that it does kind of run through how for each bug, each product has success, right? So that's kind of a nice one there. Oh, I didn't grab oh no, it's right here. Insecticidal soap is another really great one. This is by the Safer brand, these bright green bottles. This is about as mild of a formula as you can use in your garden, right? Similarly to the Be Safe, but they've got a little bit more active ingredients than some of what this has got. If anybody's ever heard or seen the method of like a little bit of Dawn dish soap in a spray bottle kind of concept, right? That's basically what this is going to be, okay? So it's about as mild as you can be with this one. This has also got seaweed extract, so it's also helping, I don't want to use the word repair, but it's helping stimulate maybe the leaf development. So when you are spraying it, there's at least something for the leaf to help digest, right? Endol is another one. This one is got the pyrethrins though. This is the one that we're going to use very last. We should only be grabbing a bottle like this if we've got a bad infestation. Okay, pyrethrins are what's not friendly for the bees and the pollinators, right? Pyrethrins also have a much longer half-life than some of the others, right, that we're talking about, neems and things of that nature, meaning that it's going to last in the plant much longer. So we really want to avoid stepping into pyrethrins unless we absolutely need to, right? So this should be always kind of the last resort. So we should start over here and slowly work our way this way, kind of thing. Any specific questions on bugs and care in that way? Yes, please.
So I know that ladybugs can eat aphids.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I also read recently that a lot of ladybugs, if you like buy them, they can have parasites that can then infect the like native ladybugs.
Yep, yep.
So I'm not buying ladybugs.
Yep.
Is there a similar problem with buying green lacewings?
So that's a great question. So most of our ladybugs, when you buy them, we don't sell ladybugs for this reason. The only way to harvest a ladybug farm on a ladybug farm is when they go dormant. So the first problem that we actually started to learn is when a ladybug goes dormant, it's already eaten all the food around it. So the first thing that a ladybug does when it comes out of hibernation is leaves where it is, because it assumes all the food's gone, right? So that was the first thing. And then we realized, oh, by doing so, now we're spreading parasites and other diseases and such. So what we use instead is our attractants. And they're typically just kind of those bright yellow little stakes that go into the ground, and they're releasing a hormone and a pheromone that kind of bring in the native ladybugs. So yes, we don't sell ladybugs for that reason. Now, green lacewings are mostly all harvested within the state. So what's great about that is you're also bringing that in closer to home, meaning if there is a parasite or something of that nature, either you got it. Either it already exists in the natural ecosystem that we have, or they've become or grown immune to it, etc. Right? So you've got less risk of spread of disease in that way. And mantis eggs, the same thing. Yep. But some mantis eggs, if I remember, are actually Kansas technically that they're harvested, but it's somewhere kind of odd. I don't know why that's odd to my brain, but I don't think of Kansas, and I don't think of right. Yeah. But yeah, that's another great one. They're great predators for the garden. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So just to touch on that for clarification.
Yeah.
If you are sourcing beneficial insects, you would recommend a local provider as opposed to
absolutely. Yep, it's as local as you can get it, the better. There are a lot of places, I actually just recently found this out, I had no idea. Apparently there's a whole market of buying bugs online kind of thing for the beneficial bugs. As best you can, find them somewhere local. And somewhere local that you trust in the way of like knowing that they've done their homework of where they're getting them also, right? Because yeah, that can be a really big thing. You're running the risk of essentially spreading diseases and all of these things, parasites and such, right? That can inevitably wipe out a native community or put it to a critically low level for a couple of years. Yeah. So we try to avoid that. Best we can, at least, right? But attractants are really great for that reason. Most of the time, too, if you've got a really bad infestation, you're going to notice a lot of these beneficial insects, right? And what I always kind of joke about when I'm walking around in my yard, I'm like, oh, I've found 3 or 4 beneficial insects. I got a problem somewhere that I didn't know about, right? Because why else would they be here, right? So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind is, if you are seeing a lot of these guys, don't fight them, but figure out what they're doing here, right? Why are they visiting my yard? Why are they hanging out in my yard? I might need to keep an eye on that. We talk a lot about, if anybody's ever done our gardening for wildlife class, we'll talk about a kind of a sacrificial garden and kind of how to set that up for wildlife. But sometimes that's beneficial. I've got one in the corner of my yard that I kind of use to just, I live up against a creek. I've got a lot of land around me that's vacant, so I try to coexist as best I can in that way, right? But sometimes I do attract the unwanteds, right? But inevitably right behind, I've got a slew of beneficial insects that are fighting it off, right? So it's a great little thing to see, but you do want to be, again, cautious with what products we're using right away in that way, right? Let's see, what else on bugs? Any other questions that I didn't hit on that one? All pretty good? Slugs. Oh, slugs, that's a great one. Yeah, diatomaceous earth is a good one. There is if you have a really bad issue with slugs, they are slow and steady when they are in the garden, right? There is a product that we have, it is a granular, it's down with the other not so great guys, right, way down here on the shelf kind of thing. That is very effective, and because it's like a shaker can kind of concept, you have a lot of control with it. So if you do, again, have an infestation in that way, I would definitely do kind of the base of each of your plants as a preventative if you know you've got an issue for sure.
Haven't come back this year yet.
Good. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. The weather's been a little funny, so I would say if year after year you have had issues with them, be ready for that. Diatomaceous earth. Are you doing a raised bed? Is that how you? Your containers. All right, so when at the base of each of your containers, if your space allows, what I would actually do is take some of the diatomaceous earth and kind of make little rings right at the base, because for them to get in, they're coming up the sides, and you might be able to prevent that before they even get to the soil.
Dogs, is that
Okay, diatomaceous earth, totally fine. Yep, just don't put it out in the way of a windy day. If it's a really small captured space and it's windy, make sure you've got some sort of cover on, right? They're very, very sharp in that, so you don't want to be inhaling or ingesting it. Yeah, for sure. But no, other than that, it's super safe. There are some vets down the street that will come and order the large bags because it's a treatment for dogs kind of thing. So yeah, super safe. Yeah. Let me see. We talked a little bit about spider mites too. That's kind of the other most common one. Oh, while you're watering, that's why I put this photo in here. This is the underside of a leaf. When we're out in the garden, don't forget to inspect the lower sides of your leaves, right? Bugs are smart, they've adapted, this is nature, right? So flip some of your leaves over to make sure that they're not hiding from you. If you do have an issue and you are doing sprays that you need to treat with, right? Make sure you're treating the underside of those leaves as well. Bugs are very smart. The product will be on top of the leaf, drip down, they're underneath the leaf, they're safe, right? So it was a waste of your money and time as well kind of thing. So make sure as most you can you're spraying the tops and bottoms of leaves, okay? They will hide. Their goal is to eat. Let's see. Oh, that was it. Those are all pictures I had. Cool. All right, so did I miss anything? What other questions do we have? Did I not cover? Yes.
I just had a question about the bags.
Please,
The raised bed soil.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Does that soil contain stuff like perlite and core and?
So this one is going to have some core in it, but this company is still one of the ones using a little bit of peat, so you will find peat in this one. But it does not have, it's not going to have a ton of perlite in that one. I don't think this has any perlite. If you're is it a raised bed or a container that you're doing?
I'm going to do a raised bed.
Raised bed, you don't even need it then. You're going to go straight to the bed. This is basically quite literally a ready to use. One of their little infographics they have is actually someone just cutting a hole in the bag and planting in it, just, but it's a literal like ready to go soil. Yep. The only thing I would add to that, like we were talking about earlier, is a little bit of the humates upon planting, right? And make sure you've got your liquid seaweed available to be ready for the heat, right? And then of course feed a couple weeks down the road as you start with that. Yep. Yeah, but no, that one's easiest bag you could possibly get.
But if I was going to go container over raised bed,
Yeah.
you would maybe add some stuff in.
I would add a little bit of honestly, in a big container like doing a pot or like that example 5-gallon bucket concept, I would actually get a potting soil and the raised bed and mix a 50-50 ratio of the two. Yep. Potting soils by nature are not actually a soil technically. There's no compost in them. So going straight into a potting soil, you're going to actually feed more than you would with a compost, right? Because you need to figure out a way to balance the supplement that the plant is missing. So if you've got an opportunity where you can mix a compost in a potting soil, right, you're going to have the best of both worlds that way. Yep. If we think about our grow pots, when it comes to container gardening, why we're always so concerned about drainage, if we think about our grow pots, they're full of holes on the bottom, and it's for that reason right here that's happening in my hand, is because these guys get watered regularly, far more regularly than they would in your home or the plant actually likes. Why do we do that? Because there's so much drainage happening. There's so much more oxygen getting into the soil. When you get home, you've got one hole in your pot, right? It's quite the difference to a lot of these grow pots, right? So when we talk about that concept of just one hole, now we have an issue with possible much more moisture being sit inside the soil. So we need added materials for drainage, such as a perlite, expanded shells, things of that nature, right? So you want to make sure that's balanced in that way. Any other questions? Yes?
So when transitioning plants from indoors to outdoors, mainly starting from seedlings,
Yeah.
Pre-spring or whatever, are you having them under a shade cloth? Or are you putting them directly where they will be as they go?
So if you're starting right now, and you're getting everything that's come outside now because, fingers crossed, we're done. And we're moving into a warmer season. If you're doing it now, the plant will develop with the more intense sun. So I don't typically worry too much about a shade cloth this time of year. I worry about my shade cloths when we get into the peak of summer. Usually I don't take mine out until honestly July, August time, where the sun is just the most brutal, right? If we had, what was it, last year when we got into May and we were like 100 degrees is here and it was here to stay, right? Was that May last year, I feel like? Yeah. I did bring them out a little early last year. But really, I don't worry about it until we get to that summer sun effect.
And when bringing them out, you're looking for that last day of the frost kind of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely want to be past your last day of frost. Usually, I try to bring them, if you're going to start seedlings, I haven't done that personally in a while, but if you're starting inside and you're bringing them out, what I used to be most concerned about is that last bit of fluctuation that we would see, kind of like we're in right now, right? Where we got warm, we were all in shorts and tank tops, and then we went back to pants and hoodies kind of concept. I try to get past that little window because again, your baby plant is not quite as ready to battle that fluctuation as much as a mature plant would be, right? So when you bring them out, I try to bring it out in the safest. Are we past all the crazy yet? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. But usually by April, you're safe.
And so when taking cuttings, do you recommend having kind of an indoor system where you have them under a light or keep them outside? And are you using rooting hormone for cutting?
Depends on the plant type. So I could run you through a few of those if you want to hang around after class there. But there's a couple of methods between powders and gels, depending on the variety of plant, and then what the hardiness level of the plant is and how quickly it would root would change, in my opinion, if you'd want to go straight outside or inside kind of thing. Yeah. So there's a few variables that get into that pretty specific. Yeah. But yes, both methods are beneficial for different types, I guess, for sure. Yeah.
How do you approach the different soil types for, say, succulents versus herbs and veggies versus tropicals? Like, do you always start with one of those bags and mix in whatever as needed, or do you start with totally different things?
Personally, I typically start with probably always. I would say in all of the stuff that you mentioned is the Happy Frog. And then I add to what it is that I want. Basically, I'm customizing it to what I want, right? So if I take the Happy Frog, the brown soil here, because what I like about that is it's got you've got your humic acids in it in the mycorrhiza already, right? So you've got some goodies already built in, earthworm castings, backgrounds, all that. So you've got some goodies in this, and then I customize it to what I want. So if I was going to the succulent side, I would bring in something like some lava sand and expanded shell, right? I just grab our small bags of that, 'cause you don't need a ton of it, mix that all in and kind of make my own soil that direction. If I'm going more into the herbs and veggies, I would probably add either the raised bed if I had some at home, if not just a straight compost into it, with things like some vermiculite or perlite kind of concept, right? You know what I mean? So I kind of customize it in that way, I guess. But for the ease, we do carry something specific to each, right? So it just depends on maybe the work that you'd want to put in at home for sure. But yeah, usually I start with something more of a kind of a basic mid-level, if you will, in the way that it's got all the goodies. I just need to customize one direction or another. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Any other big questions? Everybody feeling good? Is there anything I didn't cover that anyone was hoping to cover? We've got some time still.
I can't keep time alive.
Yes, time is actually, that's a great one. People run into that quite a lot. Time in a container can be really difficult because of water control. So honestly, time does a lot better in ground here. Usually when I'm doing time, my partner loves time, so we have a lot of time. I do it right as like a border planting in my perennial beds. Something that I let dry out completely. Okay, so if you're doing it in a patio, do more of a shallow dish. Think of it more like, treat it more like a succulent, actually. You know, if you've got like a nice bowl style dish or more of kind of a flat elongated dish, that kind of style of planting for a succulent, go that route, let it dry out a little extra. It likes dry soil, but it does like regular watering, right? So that's always a challenge. So when you run into a plant like that, you want extra drainage material. So kind of going to the idea of customizing the soil, if you've got a standard potting soil like the Happy Frog at home, get some expanded shell and some lava sand added into that so you get those nutrients out of it, right? But that way it drains quickly. So you can still water probably about once a week in a shallow dish container, but that way you're getting that water to flow through without staying heavy in the soil. Yeah, I usually pair my thymes with things like lavenders and rosemaries, things that also want really dry, quick draining soil. Yeah, for sure. Any other goodies? Everybody feeling good? We're all gonna go start our own veggie beds. I love it. I love it. We learned so many things today. Cool. If you guys have any other questions, come and see me. Oh, I did want to throw out, there's a couple of really great books that we have in stock right now. Actually, all of these, I won't hold them all up, but these two are really, really great. So if you guys are just beginner starters, these are two really awesome books. They've got so many little tips and tricks and stuff in here. Books are always helpful to have around. The internet is wonderful, but it leads you down a dark rabbit hole sometimes. So keeping something a little like a book literature is a little bit more focused, right? These guys are both really great reference guides. And then this teaming with micronutrients and teaming with nutrients and such is so awesome to talk about soils. So this is really, really great one too for reference. All right. Let me know if you guys have any other questions, but I appreciate you guys coming in today. Thank you guys very much. We will see, we've got another one next week on perennials too. So if anybody's expanding from their veggies into their perennial beds, we will be here same time next week too. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.